Hello everybody, we're back in our home base of Yael, and we actually have a few live participants here as well. And our prayers and our tefillos are certainly that, number one, all of the world should recover and be healthy from the machala. And I also want to say that our prayers and our tefillos are specifically for what's going on in America now, which is unrelated to Corona, but to different rioting and social unrest and violence. And again, I'm not here to make political statements, although I think we certainly have to condemn police brutality, and that's something that has to stop and has to be controlled. But at the same time, the old cliche that two wrongs do not make a right, and to respond to violence and with looting and with social unrest is certainly not the way that societies will come to shalom. Again, we hope and we pray that all of this turbulence, whether corona-related or the general social unrest-related, should be harbingers and precursors to Mashiach. This could be part of the Chavlei Mashiach, the birth pains of Mashiach, all of the man-made constructs that create what is called the veneer of civilization can collapse overnight. And really, as Chazal say, one of the signs of Yemot HaMashiach is the recognition of Ein Lanu Lihisha'en Ela El Avinu Shebashamayim, that there's no one that we can rely upon except God. And if that is the lesson that we get from all of this, then indeed that would be a very powerful silver lining in the dark clouds that all of us face. And we hope that the faster we can learn the lesson, the less we'll have to go through all of these different sorrows. So let's try to be quick learners, try to absorb this truth, and Be'ezrat Hashem, there should be shalom and refuah and bria tagufa nefesh in the world as we now know it. So I want to go back a little bit. We celebrated Shavuos, and then immediately afterwards we went into Shabbos, Parshas Naso. But I want to speak about Parshas Naso, and even though it's it's not the Eretz Yisrael calendar, but it actually is the Kriyas HaTorah for Chutz La'aretz this coming week, because on Shabbos Chutz La'aretz was keeping the second day of Shavuos. So I know we have some Chutz La'aretz listeners, so I will actually go with your calendar this particular week. Parshas Naso is actually the longest Parsha in the Torah. And although it is not the hardest Parsha to learn, because very, very interestingly, at the end of the Parsha, it enumerates the korbanot that the Nesiim, the heads of the tribes, brought. Each Nasi brought it on a different day. So the first 12 days of Hakamat HaMishkan, there were korbanos of the Nesiim. And interestingly enough, the korban is exactly the same for every day. So if you're a Baal Koreh, you get a certain break here, because although there are many, many psukim, but the trup is the same, the words are the same. So that's why it's a little easier than perhaps other parshiot, which don't have so much repetition. And it's worthwhile to pay a little attention on the idea that why does the Torah repeat the korbanot of the Nesiim over and over and over again? We know that generally the Chumash does not waste words. In fact, many, many halachot are learned out of a single letter, a word, extra word. The Torah is not going to give you a sentence if it could have conveyed the idea in a word. The Torah will not even give you a word if it can convey the idea in a letter. There is certainly economy of expression. So why would the Torah go over this 12 times? The Torah could have just said, Nachshon ben Aminadav, the head of the tribe of Yehuda, who was the first Nasi, brought A, B, C, A to Z, and then you could say, V'yasu kol hanesiim kacha. And all of the Nesiim did the same thing. So, difference, and they just mention their names. Okay, even mention their names, right? The Nesiim were this, and they all brought the same thing. Even that. So you would have had 12 verses, but you wouldn't have had to repeat the whole listing multiple times. So I just want to share with you two very quick answers to that question. Answer number one is really from the Medrash Rabbah on Parshas Naso. The Medrash Rabbah on Parshas Naso is on the largest Parsha of the Torah, but it's also the largest Medrash of the Torah, meaning there are the most pages of Medrash in this Parsha. And part of why it's so large is that the Medrash goes through the korban of each Nasi and shows that although externally every single Nasi brought the same thing, symbolically and spiritually each item had a different meaning with respect to every single Nasi. So the gold bowl that Yehuda brought did not have the same meaning and tachlit and kavanah as the gold bowl that Yisachar brought. And therefore the Torah repeats the idea that the Nesiim brought the same thing to teach me that although they externally brought the same thing, each korban was fundamentally different. And indeed, that's the whole idea of Shvatim generally. I think I've mentioned a number of times that in the Torah, the concept of a tribe is a major element of self-identity. You're a Jew, but not only are you a Jew, you're a member of Reuven or Shimon or Yisachar or Zevulun. Now today, the concept of tribal identity is relatively insignificant in Judaism. In fact, it's totally insignificant unless you're a Kohen or a Levi. Most of us have no idea what tribe we're from, and it's not something that we think about. But certainly in the time of the Torah and in the time of the first Beis HaMikdash, your shevet was a very important part of who you were. Every shevet had its own nasi. Every shevet had its own portion of land. You had your own formation in the desert. You had your own flag. In fact, even politically it was very, very important. In many ways, the Shvatim, once they came to Eretz Yisrael, each shevet regarded its land as almost a sovereign state. This is before there was a king. It was similar to the colonies or the early idea of statehood. In fact, if you go back to American history, the Civil War was fought not so much over the issue of slavery. The Civil War was fought over the issue of secession. Did a state have the right to secede from the federal government? Meaning, were states considered to be sovereign entities, or were they nullified to this central authority? In fact, people point out that prior to the Civil War, the term United States was a plural noun. So you would say the United States were in agreement. Because prior to the Civil War, every state was regarded as almost a sovereign country, which had kind of just an agreement to work together on certain matters. After the Civil War, United States became a singular noun. The United States is, not the United States are. Now you find a very, very similar issue in the book of Shoftim. You may recall one of the very sordid and tragic incidents in the book of Judges involved a certain concubine that a man took in. He was traveling and he took his concubine into the tribal area of Binyamin, and she was basically raped and left to die. And the man was so incensed that this happened that he actually cut her up into 12 pieces. Again, that itself is amazing. And he sent a piece to every shevet. Obviously, there's a lot of social breakdown here. But the Shvatim demanded that the tribe of Benjamin extradite the offender, the murderer, to stand trial by the Shvatim. They saw this as a national crime. And the tribe of Binyamin refused to extradite. And the Ramban explains, because the tribe of Binyamin asserted that each tribe, before there was a king, was a sovereign nation. We were united by religion, just like Catholics, right? You have Catholics in France and Catholics in Italy. Strangely enough, the Jewish people in Eretz Yisrael regarded the tribes as separate city-states in which there was no jurisdiction, and our civil war was fought over that story of Pilegesh Begiva. So to me, again, I'm going all the way back to my college days. I was a student of political science. That's a common pre-law major. So political issues interest me very much, and it is very, very fascinating to me that the central political issue in Pilegesh Begiva was exactly the central political issue in the American Civil War, and that is why the appointment of a king came very shortly after Pilegesh Begiva, because there was a concept we had to be one nation. But why am I bringing this up now? I'm bringing this up now to highlight the idea that what you might call tribalism was a very important element of Jewish self-identity. And this is something that we almost have totally forgotten today. And why would tribalism be so significant? After all, do we need another source of disunity? Isn't it enough that we're all Jewish? So, in a positive way, the notion of tribes is very important because it indicates the idea that in the formation of community and achdut, God does not want conformity and sameness. Every tribe had its own unique approach in Avodat Hashem. Yisachar was the tribe that did full-time Torah learning, Zevulun was engaged in commerce, etc. And what God is basically saying is, we need achdut, we need community, we need togetherness. We need unity. But unity is not the same as conformity. Community is not the same as sameness. It's precisely the fact that there are different approaches in serving God that creates beauty and majesty within the Jewish people and ultimately gives the greatest glory to God. The Medrash says that the beauty of a garden lies in the different colors of flowers. You can have a monochromatic garden, you can have a garden of only red roses, and that has a certain beauty, to be sure. But for most people, there's a certain joy in different colors, different textures. Whether you call it a mosaic, or whether you call it a tapestry, or whether you call it a symphony, music. Right? If you played the same note over and over and over again, that would not have any beauty, that would just be noise. It's precisely the different notes that create beauty. Now again, I'm not referring to movements that reject the Torah. That's a separate matter. But within the framework of Torah, there is so much potential for diversity. That is why, whether it's Ashkenazim, Sephardim, different types of Sephardim, Teimanim, Ashkenazim, Hungarians, Polish, Russian, Litvish, Moroccan, Syrian, Iraqi, we can look at that as a weakness. And indeed, when it degenerates into machloket and sinat chinam, it's a bad thing. But it's also a cause for great celebration. That God has created a system where many different types of flowers flourish. And that creates a beauty in Am Yisrael. Right, there are two models of unity. There is a unity that might be called a melting pot. A melting pot is when everybody obliterates their self-identity to become an homogeneous part of a whole. That was the model in the United States in the early decades of the 20th century. Right? If someone would mention the idea that we ought to have Spanish as a primary language of instruction in the public schools, they would be laughed at in the early part of the 20th century, because the response is, you're in America, you got to speak English. That was also the model in the early years of the State of Israel, with sometimes disastrous consequences, in which religious Taimani children were forcibly shorn of their payos, as well as refugees from the Holocaust. But the deeper type of unity is not the unity of the melting pot, but the unity, you might say, of the salad bowl, in which you look at a salad, you have lettuce, tomatoes, peppers, chickpeas, whatever it is, different colors, different textures, different tastes, different smells, and they combine to create a beautiful, harmonious whole. This is a deeper type of achdus. This is an achdus that doesn't obliterate individuality, but it's an achdus that celebrates individuality. And that is why tribes are so important. Tribes are so important because they represent that within the miskeret, within the framework of Torah, there doesn't have to be sameness. There can be individual gishot. And they are all legitimate. Because God is infinite. And therefore there may be infinite ways of connecting to God. Again, let me emphasize, within the framework of the Torah and the mitzvos. They're kind of the common denominator that unites us. And thus in the Midbar, you have all the different Shvatim. And they are surrounding the Mishkan in the middle, because the tabernacle of God is their focal point, is their center, is the goal to which all of their efforts are directed. And that is why the Torah emphasizes that although externally the Nesiim did the same thing, it is repeated 12 times, because within the sameness there is also difference, different meaning, different kavanah, different significance. So all of us are keeping Shabbat, but I bring my perspective, you bring your perspective. Right? All of us keep kashrut, whatever it would be, but we have different understandings and different ways of connecting. So consequently, answer number one is that the repetition of the Nesiim is there to teach me that even if externally we're doing the same thing, each of us brings a unique perspective and meaning to it. And community and achdut and b'derech klal, the keeping of Torah and mitzvahs, is not designed to destroy my individuality, but to create a framework and mechanism through which it can be expressed. Okay, that's answer number one. Answer number two makes really an opposite point. The first Nasi who brought, right, you had 12 days of dedication, right? The korbanot of the Nesiim were brought from Rosh Chodesh Nisan through the 12th of Nisan. And every day a different Nasi brought a korban. The first Nasi who brought the first korban is a famous person. His name is Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he is the head of the tribe of Yehuda. If you remember Megillat Ruth, Nachshon is actually mentioned at the end of Megillat Ruth. Nachshon was the ancestor of Boaz, who was the ancestor through Ruth of Yishai and of David. So the royal line of David comes from, including Mashiach, comes from Nachshon ben Aminadav. Nachshon ben Aminadav was a great hero. He was great in faith. At the splitting of the Red Sea, when many of the Jews were paralyzed with fright, because they're between the proverbial rock and a hard place where the Egyptians are running after them and they're facing this ocean, or the sea. And Nachshon, with full emunah, jumps into the sea up to his neck or up to his nose, according to some opinions. And the sea opened up in the merit of his emunah. So Nachshon was very, very great, and he brought the various korbanos that he brought. But then the next day, the next one is Nisanel ben Suar, who is Nasi Sachar. Now it's interesting that when it describes Nisanel ben Suar, the Torah uses an unusual grammatical formulation. Bayom HaSheni Hikriv Nisanel ben Suar. Now Hikriv Nisanel ben Suar in Hebrew is a little ambiguous. We translate Nisanel ben Suar as the subject of the sentence. Nisanel ben Suar brought the korban. But you can actually translate it as the object of the sentence. He sacrificed Nisanel ben Suar. He sacrificed himself. Because keep in mind that day 2 is a very critical day. Day 1, the great Nachshon brought a magnificent offering. Animals, incense, gold, silver. Nisanel ben Suar has to make a decision the next day. Is this a competitive event? Or is this a collaborative event? He might have had the attitude, if Nachshon ben Aminadav brought X, I'm going to bring X squared. And that would have created a competition in which each one is trying to outdo the other. Nachshon subordinated his egotism, his gaiva, his desire for prominence, by bringing exactly the same offering that Nachshon ben Aminadav did. And as a result, he established the pattern for all the other Nisim, that in the service of God, the goal is not competition and self-aggrandizement, but we're all in this together. That was an amazing thing. Again, if I could use another American history analogy, George Washington, who was the first president of the United States, had to make a lot of decisions. For example, many people wanted him to be president for life. And if he would have done that, he would have established a pattern that the presidency is like a monarchy. He is the one that said the president should only serve for 2 years. And that became like a minhag of the United States until FDR, during World War II and the Depression, who had 4 terms, and after FDR they passed a constitutional amendment. You only have 2 terms. Or, what do you call the president? Do you call him Your Excellency, Your Majesty? There were many people who, they were so used to the British mores, call him Your Majesty. Washington was Koveya. So Nisan al-Ben Suar, Lahavdil, gets the George Washington credit, although he was second, of creating a pattern that we're not here to compete. We're all on the same page. And as a result, I can rejoice in your mitzvahs just as you can rejoice in my mitzvahs. This is not a zero-sum game where if I win it's your loss and if you win it's my loss. Rather, these are win-win situations. When goodness is in the world, I can rejoice even if I don't get the credit for it. Because ultimately, it's not about me. Ultimately, it's about God. The great Hasidic Rebbe, Rav Zusha, and there are many stories about Rav Zusha, right? He's the one that said that I don't understand what it means to thank God for the bad as well as for the good, because nothing bad ever happened to me in spite of his poverty and the like. But Rav Zusha once said, if God would come to me and say, you can change places with Avraham Avinu or Moshe Rabbeinu, I wouldn't accept that deal. Because let's assume I changed places. Well, that would be good for me. I would have all the merit of Avraham. But what does God get out of the deal? There's still only one Avraham and one Moshe. If he would say, I'll make you a second Avraham, all right, I'll consider that, because then there are 2 Avrahams in the world. But if it's simply a question of me being Avraham and Avraham being me, where's the gain for God? And that's something to think about. You know, the Chazon Ish has a very interesting discussion in the Sefer Emunah B'Tachon. It's a beautiful, beautiful little book the Chazon Ish wrote on Emunah and trust in God. And he makes some very important points, which is not the main point of our discussion. But he has what I think you might call a very mature idea of B'Tachon. Sometimes people think B'Tachon is, if you just hope enough, God will give you everything you want. So if you need a car, you need a new car, so think about that new car and you'll get the new car the next day. Now the Chazon Ish says that unfortunately that doesn't always happen. We pray for the sick, they don't always get better. Things happen. B'Tachon does not mean everything will come out the way I want it to come out. But it means everything has a purpose. Everything has an ultimate good, even if I don't understand it. So the Baal B'Tachon is not necessarily going to be spared from tragedy and difficulty. Sometimes he will be. Hashem has great mercy. But sometimes God's cheshbonos are beyond us. So the Baal B'Tachon is not necessarily going to have an easier life externally. But the Baal B'Tachon is full of courage and resilience because he knows that no matter what happens, God is going to give me the strength to grow from it and to go on. And that gives a person great joy, but it's not the naivete of Pollyanna that everything will turn out great, but the understanding that even if things don't turn out as great as I hoped, they are great in the sense that they can be very, very positive and uplifting. So that's the Sefer Emuno Bitachon. But in Emuno Bitachon, he talks about a lot of things, and he gives an interesting thought experiment about how much of our mitzvos are bound up in egotism. And it's a little disheartening in a way. He gives, let's imagine, this is his experiment. Let's imagine you're a person who loves to have guests on Shabbos and Yom Tov. And whenever you see a new face in the shul, you go over to them and say, oh, please be my guest. And it's Friday night. And you don't have any guests. You didn't see anybody this week. And all of a sudden, after Ma'ariv, you see a new face. You see a stranger. And you're so excited that you'll have the opportunity for Achnasas Orchim. And you go over to the stranger with a smile and an outstretched hand, and you say, Reb Yid, I'm so happy to see you. I'm so happy to meet you. Can I have the honor of inviting you to my house for Shabbos? And the Yid tells you, oh, thank you so much, but just 3 minutes ago, so-and-so asked me, so I have to go. I'm going there. Stop the cameras. Do you feel good or do you feel bad? So the Chazon Ish says the following. Again, this is a hard cheshbon nefesh. If your concern was, I want to help this person, I want to be sure he's taken care of, then assuming that the host that he's going to is a fine person, let's make that assumption, then it doesn't have to be you. Baruch Hashem, you're taken care of. I'm so happy you're not going to eat alone. But if the mitzvah is about egotism, recognition, honor, glory, or even just telling yourself what a great guy you are, then you're going to feel bad because you're not going to have the opportunity to show up. Now, let me be very, very clear. I'm not saying, and the Chazon Ish isn't saying, that the chesed of the person that feels bad is not a chesed. Even if we have mixed motives, our chesed can still be, is a wonderful, wonderful thing. But it does indicate that we're not always doing it for God. We're often doing it for us. And the Nesiim, the Sanal Ben Suar, turned this into a collaboration, a shutfus, a working together, instead of a competition. And that's why the Torah somewhat monotonously repeats it over and over and over again, as they all did the same. So those are the two answers why the Torah repeats the Nesiim over and over again. One, that even though they did the same, it was different. But number two, the fact that they did the same shows they weren't in competition with each other. I saw a YouTube video. People sometimes like to boast. I mean, kids like to boast. I don't think adults do it that much, about how late their seders went. This year was different. So on YouTube, there was just an imaginary argument between two yeshiva boys. One guy was saying, "Oh, we went till 2 o'clock," and the other one said, "Went till 4 o'clock," and the other says, "We went till 11 o'clock," and then the other guy was saying, "We went to Lag BaOmer, we went to Shavuos, we're still going on." Whatever. That's how ridiculous competition can get. In this sense, let me recount a story, and I think I may have said the story around a few months ago, but it's worthwhile to review a little bit about the Panovich Rav, the great, great Rav of Panovich. Panovich was a city in Lithuania. Panovich Rav survived the Holocaust. Indeed, let me point out, in Lithuania, there were 800 community rabbanim, and 799 of them died. The Panovich Rav was the only Rav of a Litvish Kehila that survived. And he came to Eretz Yisrael, Rav Yosef Shlomo Kahaneman, and he was somewhat obsessed with the idea that he was the only survivor. And because of this, he saw that he had a special role from Hashem to rebuild Torah, not only with the world-famous Panovich Yeshiva, but with many, many yeshivas, orphanages, hospitals, Beis Yaakovs, Yeshiva Katanas, Chadorim, one of the great, great, great builders of Torah. At the same time, the Panovich Rav was a person who was very tolerant, very open. In his day, they did not say Tachanan on Yom HaAtzmaut, and they flew the Israeli flag. The first time I heard about the Panovich Rav, Panovich Rav was nifter in 1968, I believe. when I was in 9th grade in high school. So I remember I was very new to yeshiva. I just come to Ner Yisrael in Baltimore. I was a 9th grader. And the whole yeshiva and the mechina, the high school, got together to hear the Rosh Yeshiva give a hesped for the Panovich Rav. The Rosh Yeshiva was very close to the Panovich Rav. And it was in Yiddish. I didn't know what was going on. I was like falling asleep. But at that moment, something happened that I had never seen before, and I have never seen since. I had never seen it since. The Rosh Yeshiva said, everybody should sit on the ground to mourn the Panovich. I woke up. We all have to sit on the ground. I've never seen that. I've never seen that since, even in Eretz Yisrael. But that's how great the Panovich Rav was. And the Panovich Rav was a great gadol b'Torah, but he spent most of his time traveling all over the world collecting money. He was a legendary fundraiser. In fact, the Satmar Rebbe said about the Panovich Rav after the first moon launching that was also around in the late 60s, whatever it is, there was a discussion of whether there's life on other planets. So the Panovich Rav said, so the Satmar Rebbe said, I don't know about the science, but I can prove to you there is no life on other planets, because if there would have been, the Panovich Rav would have been there collecting money. If he was not there, if he was not on Mars, there is no life on Mars. That's what the Satmar Rav said. So the story goes the following, that the Panovich Rav once came to Chicago, and when he would give a drasha, it was filled not only with Torah and inspiration, but with stories, with jokes, with history, all sorts of things. He was a tremendously entertaining speaker as well as a learned speaker. So he comes to Chicago to collect money, and the same time that he came, a meshulach from a much smaller Novardika yeshiva in Bnei Brak also came. When the Novardika meshulach saw the Panovich Rav, he froze, because he said, I'm not going to get anything tonight. The Panovich Rav is so charismatic, there'll be nothing left for me. So the Novardika meshulach decided, okay, I'm not going to collect money tonight. I'm just going to sit in the audience and enjoy a wonderful drasha. So the Panovich Rav gives a wonderful drasha full of jokes, full of Torah, full of chizuk, full of inspiration. And people are pulling out their checkbooks and they're going to give very, very generously. And at the end of the drasha, the Panovich Rav says, Rabbi Yitzchak, there's a very, very fine man here who is collecting for a wonderful yeshiva in Bnei Brak. Please give him all the money you would have given me. Well, suffice it to say that the Novardik Meshulach did much better than he normally did. And he went to the Panovich Rav and he said, Rebbe, I am so, so grateful for what you did, but I really don't understand it. You traveled from Eretz Yisrael all the way to Chicago. And in those days they didn't even have jet planes, so it was a much longer trip. And you're elderly, and you gave up all of the money that would have gone to your yeshiva to be given to my yeshiva? So the Panovich Rav said, I don't know what you mean, your yeshiva, my yeshiva. We are all working for the same team. We are working for God's glory. We are working that people should learn Torah. If we can collect enough money for 20 people to learn for a year, why do I care if those 20 people are in the Panovich Beis Medrash or the Novardika Beis Medrash? What's the difference? Now, let me just say, this is a very, very rare attitude, even among great Rosh Yeshivas. Everyone has their own institution that they care about. But the Panovich Rav saw everything in the sense of bringing glory to Hashem. There's that yeshiva, each one has its makam, each one has its legitimacy, each one has its place. And the Panovich Rav said, it doesn't make a difference if it's my yeshiva or your yeshiva, as long as we're both trying to do Hashem's work. In more modern times, a Rosh Yeshiva who was like that was Rav Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Zichrono Livracha, the head of the Mirror Yeshiva. it said that he would often collect money from here, and then if he was in Lakewood or near Israel, he would give it out to them. In fact, because of this, Amir had a rule that someone always had to accompany him when he did fundraising and took the money right away because he would give it away. But his hashkafa was, Torah is Torah. And I think that that's an attitude that we should try to develop in our own lives. The idea of rejoicing in the mitzvos that other people do. Because God's name is glorified. Mitzvahs are not about egotism. It's not about competition. It's not about self-aggrandizement. It's about glorifying Hashem. So when I do mitzvahs, I'm happy. Not because I did it. I'm happy because HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name was sanctified. And when you do mitzvahs, I'm happy because Hashem's name was sanctified. And that's one of the lessons of Nasano Ben Suer. But to go further with this, let's go back a little bit. When the Torah describes the contours of the ideal camp, so the Torah says that certain negative factors must be expelled from the Jewish camp. And it mentions 3 sources of tumah that are expelled from the Jewish camp. That is the Mitzorah, the leper, the Zav. The Zav is a person with a gonorrheal flow. And the Tamei Met, the person who comes in contact with the dead. Now Rashi, based on the Gemara, explains that these expulsions are a little complicated because in fact the Jewish camp is divided into 3 sections. There is the Mishkan and the courtyard of the Mishkan that more or less corresponds with the Temple Mount today. And from there, and then around that is the camp of the Levites, the Leviim, and around that on 4 sides is the camp of the Israelites. The Mitzorah is expelled from all 3 camps until the leprosy goes away. The Mitzorah is even Chutz Mimachane Yisrael. The Zav is permitted in Machane Yisrael, but he is expelled from Machane Shechina and Machane Leviah. So if he's a Levi, he has to go into the Machane Yisrael until he counts 7 days and purifies himself. And the 3rd level of Tumah, the Tamei Met, who is Tamei for 7 days and he has to be sprinkled with the ashes of the Parah Adumah, is actually permitted not only in Machane Yisrael, but is even permitted in Machane Leviah, but he's prohibited in Machane Shechina. Again, I'm oversimplifying here, and I do know it's a more complicated question, but that is the basic reason why today most poskim say you're not allowed to go on the Temple Mount because they treat the Temple Mount as the camp of the Shekhinah, and all of us that's ever been in a cemetery are Tamei Met, and we can't get purified no matter how many days it's been until we have the ashes of the Parah Adumah, and therefore this halacha even applies today. So it turns out that this mitzvah that is called Shiluach Tameim, the expulsion of the impure, takes 3 forms. Mitzorah is excluded from all 3. Zav is excluded from 2 and is allowed in the 3rd one. Tamei Meis is only excluded from the Machane Shechina and is allowed in the other 2. What is the symbolic understanding of this idea of Shiluach Tameim? So let me share with you a thought of Rav Tzadok of Lublin. Rav Tzadok says that just as Pirkei Avos tells me, there are 3 positive powers that elevate our relationship to God. That's Torah, learning Torah, Avoda, divine service of prayer and korbanos, and Gemilas Chesed, acts of loving kindness. Right? These are the factors that bring holiness into our lives and into our communities. There are 3 negative factors that destroy and banish holiness. And those 3 negative factors are kina, Kina is jealousy, envy. Taiva, excessive lust for hedonistic pleasure and materialism. And the third is kavod, ego, arrogance, self-aggrandizement. So what does Pirkei Avos say? Rabbi Elazar HaKapar says, Hakina, hataiva v'hakavod. The jealousy, the lust, and the desire for honor, motziin es ha'adam min ha'olam, they take a person out of the world. You lose your world to come. And not only do you lose your world to come, but even your life in this world is miserable. If we want to create a society of holiness, if we want to create a family of holiness, if we want to create a personality of holiness, we have to try to eradicate to the best of our abilities, we'll never be complete about this, the negative, destructive qualities of kina, taiva, and kavod. So here's what Rav Tzadok says. Symbolically, the Mitzayra represents jealousy and envy. Why is that so? Because we know that the primary sin which causes leprosy of the flesh to materialize is Lashon Hara, the evil, derogatory, negative speech we say about others. But if we look at the symptom, Lashon Hara is a symptom of a deeper cause. The deeper cause of Lashon Hara is often the envy and the jealousy that I feel about another person. I want to cut that person down because I'm jealous of their achievements. So when the Torah says, banish the Mitzayra from Klal Yisrael, symbolically the Torah's message is, try to eradicate the negative and destructive koach of jealousy. Jealousy is a totally negative trait. There is no redeeming quality in jealousy. And that is why jealousy via the Mitzayra is banished, not only from Machane Shechina and Machane Levia, but even from Machane Yisrael, because as difficult as it is to eradicate, and it is very, very difficult to eradicate, there is really a zero, spiritually, there is a zero tolerance for the midah of jealousy, because jealousy is simply begrudging the good that other people can accomplish in their lives. Now you may ask Akasha, how can I say that jealousy is totally bad? Is there not a well-known statement in Chazal that says, Kinas Sofrim, the jealousy that Torah scholars have for each other, Marbe Chachma, increases wisdom, because I want to be better, because I want to compete with you. So you have to understand that there are two ways jealousy can take effect. If the jealousy is, I see that you're accomplishing, so I want to accomplish, that might be a motivator, albeit it's not the highest level, that's called Shalol Lishma, but that could be a legitimate motivator. But there's another type of jealousy, which is not, I want to raise myself because you're doing so well. Rather, I want you to fail. I want you to fail. There is nothing redeeming about that. Again, it's human nature, where, all of us might be guilty about that. I'm not suggesting that I'm on any pedestal, but in terms of the legitimacy of that emotion, it is a poisonous, negative emotion that we should work to the greatest degree possible to eradicate. How can I want someone good to fail? By the way, this is an issue that comes up in a lot of contexts. It comes up with dieting. In fact, there's a whole documented phenomenon that, let's say you have, it's more with women than with men, but with men too. You have a group of people, that are overweight, and one of them decides to go on a diet, and that person is successful. There'll be all sorts of ways that members of the group are going to try to undermine that success. They'll say, have a piece of cake, you look like a rake, you're so thin, what's going to hurt you? You're so different than you used to be. You used to be friendly and warm, and now, you're standoffish. What is going on here, it's a painful process to describe, is that, I'm jealous of the fact that you have been successful in something that I have not been successful in. It is human nature. But not everything in human nature is good. And we have to try to work on that. So the Mitzayra gets expelled from all of Klal Yisrael, because the Mitzvah represents kinna. And the kinna of wanting a good person to fail is totally negative. We then come to the Zav. Now the Zav obviously is a person that is suffering from a sexually transmitted disease. Ziva is gonorrhea. So that's very much connected to taiva, too much lust, obviously. But it's a little tricky is this. Our relationship to physical pleasure is more equivocal than our relationship to jealousy. Jealousy, at least I could say in theory, is totally treif. But physical pleasure is a very, very different thing. On one hand, the Torah legitimates physical pleasure. After, remember the Nazir, which is also in Parshas Nazir, was a sinner. And Rashi says because he's depriving himself of the legitimate pleasures of wine. The Talmud Yerushalmi says a person will have to give an accounting for every pleasure of the world they could have enjoyed and they did not. Because God put pleasures in the world, whether it's color, music, the taste of food. These are vehicles by which we express appreciation. These are vehicles that can heighten our spirituality. So Judaism is not about asceticism. It's not about renunciation. We're supposed to enjoy the pleasures of the world. That's why we make brachos. We thank God for water, for bread, for meat. But at the same time, if you're overly invested in the material and the sensual, your mind and your heart is not going to be attuned to ruchnius, to spirituality. So, it's kind of ambiguous. Kina is bad. Taiva is potentially, number one, necessary to some degree. You have to eat. And number two, not only necessary, but even desirable and good, provided you have a certain balance. It's not the unequivocal evil that jealousy is. So Rav Tzadok says, this is reflected in the idea that the Zav does gain admission in Machane Yisrael. Machane Yisrael represents ordinary life. You're an ordinary person? You're a Beinoni? A certain amount of taiva is legitimate and proper in your life, although the Zav is in excess, but at least he's allowed because what the Zav represents, which is the koach of taiva, has a certain legitimation. But as you graduate and you become a more righteous and holy person, which is the Levi, who is the spiritual teacher, you become less involved in the material world. But let me explain why. Not by a self-conscious ethic of renunciation, but simply because you're no longer interested in those things that seem like childish and insignificant. You know, when an adult stops playing with children's toys, although adults get toys of their own, the adult is not making a decision, I'm not going to play with these toys anymore. It simply happens automatically because I'm involved in other things. So it's not like I'm not going to have this piece of cake because I'm going to be an ascetic. It's simply the Levi gets less interested in it because he's connected to Torah. So that is why the Zav that represents Taiva gains admission in Machane Yisrael, but is excluded from Machane Leviah, which are the higher, more ethereal levels of Avodas Hashem. So the Mitzvah equals Kina, the Zav equals Taiva. Now the third association is a little more subtle. The third association is Tamei Meis equals kavod. Now that's not so clear. Mitzayra is jealousy because lashon hara comes from jealousy. The zav is taiva because ziva is a sexually transmitted disease. But what is the correlation between tamei meis and kavod? So here Rav Tzadok says, Adam and Chava were originally supposed to live forever. Death came into the world as a result of the chait of the Eitz Hadas. But what was the enticement for Chava and then Adam to eat from the Eitz Hadas? Rav Tzadok says it was an appeal to their ego. Because the Nachash said to Chava, the day that you eat from the fruit, you will be like God, understanding the true nature of good and evil, whatever that means exactly. In other words, the Eitz Hadas is being marketed as a God pill. That's the ultimate appeal to the ego. You will be godly. You will be godlike. And death came into the world because of kavod, because of ego, because of the idea that we want to be more godly than we are. And that is why death came into the world, not so much as a punishment, but as a consequence. Because in many, many ways we are godly. We are made in the image of God. We have intelligence, we have creativity, we have moral autonomy, we have free will. We can create worlds and destroy worlds in many, many ways through our harnessing of technology. But death is the ultimate reminder that there's an unbridgeable chasm between creator and created. So death comes into the world because of arrogance and gaiva. And that is, by the way, why we become liberated from death when we connect to ashes, because ashes is a sign of humility. Right? Death is a consequence of gaiva. Liberation from death is when there is humility. So, if we understand, therefore, that just as Mitzayra is connected to jealousy, and Zav is connected to Taiva, the Tuma of Mace is connected to Kavite, we can now see an interesting thing. I'm going to give you two propositions which are totally opposite, and both are true. One is egotism, gaiva, kavod, self-aggrandizement are destructive and evil and take a person away from God. That's proposition number one. Proposition number two is the most important thing you can have in your life is a sense of kavod, of my significance, of my worth, of my value. How do you reconcile those two propositions? The short answer is that modesty does not mean I think of myself as a nobody. Modesty means I have to recognize my strengths, my goodness, my talents, my abilities. Because if I don't recognize what I'm capable of accomplishing, I'm never going to accomplish it. And therefore the very reason God put me in this world is not going to be fulfilled. So I have to have a sense of my worth and my value. But I also have to know that it comes from God. And I don't use it to look down at people or disparage people. And I respect what other people have too. You know, the old t-shirt, God does not make junk. That has to apply to the way I look at others. And it has to apply to the way I look at me. A person has to know their value. The great mashgiach Rav Yerucham of Mir, Rav Yerucham Lubavitch, said, the person who is unaware of their faults is a fool. I think I'm perfect. I am a foolish person. But the person who is not aware of their inner greatness is a tragic figure, because they will never become the person they were supposed to become. So, here is the thing, therefore. The Tamei Meis that represents kavod, a sense of dignity and worth, not only is necessary for Machane Yisrael, for the normal economic and social life, it's even necessary for the Levi to grow in Avodas Hashem. I have to know that I matter. It's only at the highest point, when you're mamash connected with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you can then allow your ego to slip, because you become the candle that is lost in the light of the sun. In other words, think about a rocket. Right? We just had a launching after a long hiatus. To escape the gravitational pull of the earth, you need a tremendous thrust. A tremendous thrust. Once you're beyond the atmosphere, so then the absence of gravity can allow things to fly around or to orbit without so much force. So too, to come to Hashem, I need a certain amount of ego. If I don't have a sense of egotism, I'm not going to think I could finish Shas. I'm not going to think I could do Daf Yomi. I'm not going to think my learning matters. I'm not going to think my davening matters. I got to have a sense that I can accomplish something. I'm a capable person. I'm a talented person. I need that egotism, so to speak, not only in daily life but in Avodas Hashem. But when you reach that connection to God, you've escaped the gravitational pull that's pulling you down, then you can get rid of that egotism. And that's why the Tamei Meis, that is kavod, is not only connected to Machane Yisrael and Machane Levia, but even to Machane Levia, it's only in Machane Shechina that we exclude the Tamei Meis. Right, so this is the Rav Tzadok's beautiful hezber on Shiluach Tameim, the exclusion of those who are Tamei. This is a difficult process in life, to work on Kina, to work on Taiva, to work on Kavod, and especially to understand that with Taiva, on one hand, we're supposed to embrace the world and get joy from it, but not let it control us. And Kavod, how to balance healthy self-esteem with humility and modesty. These are difficult challenges. But ultimately, this gets rid of the garbage that prevents our connecting to God. And then we can work on the positive factors of Torah, Avoda, Gemilas Chasadim. You know, Shavuos is called Zaman Matan Torasenu, the season that God has given us the Torah. Why don't we call Shavuos Zaman Kabbalat Torasenu, the day that we accepted the Torah? Why is the emphasis on God giving rather than on our accepting? And one of the many answers that is given is, God gave the Torah at a particular time and place. But accepting the Torah is something we have to do every single day. Every single day we re-accept God's Torah by our commitments. And it's not simply, oh, I keep the Torah because I accepted it 3,000 years ago. But I keep the Torah because I re-accept it every single day. So in these weeks after Shavuos, we shouldn't feel that Kabbalah Satira is over, but rather, as Chazal say, B'chol yom b'yom, every single day, Yiyu be'einecha kechadashim, the words of the Torah should be new and fresh and vibrant to all of us. So I wish us all that we should be zocha to experience this bracha, and once again, may Hashem bring refuah to the world, and may Hashem bring shalom to our brothers and sisters in the old country, in the United States, and Be'ezus Hashem, may it all be a precursor to the coming of Mashiach. Thank you. Amen.
Shabbat.